My name's Elena. I'm 17 and I was born deaf. Not partially, not gradually, fully. It runs in the family, but I'm the first girl on my mom's side in 2 generations to be born without hearing. My parents, both hearing, learned sign language the second I was diagnosed. They didn't treat me like I was broken. I was their daughter. I was whole. But the world doesn't always see it that way. When I was 9, my parents made the decision to give me cochlear implants, or CIs as we call them in the community. It wasn't something we rushed. We talked with my audiologist, doctors, and even some deaf advocates before moving forward. And I'll admit, the transition was hard, painful, overwhelming, confusing. But eventually I adapted. Now at school I wear them to make life simpler. Simpler doesn't mean easier. I still have to lip read a ton, and a lot of people don't realize how noisy hearing through CIs can be. It's not like suddenly hearing perfectly. It's like robotic static attached to a world that never learned to slow down. But I manage. I go to a mainstream public high school. It's not built for students like me. No interpreter, barely any accommodations, but I've made it work. I'm a top student, fluent in both ASL and English, and thanks to the support of a few decent teachers and my own stubbornness, I've carved out a little space for myself here. That was until Mrs. Kane walked in. Our substitute teacher. The first red flag? She didn't even bother to introduce herself. Just marched into class like she owned the place, tossed her bag on the desk and snapped, "Hats off, all of you." I was wearing a soft knit beanie. It wasn't a fashion choice, it was shielding my CIs. The cold that morning had made the magnets ache a bit, and the hat helped keep them in place. She walked straight to my desk like a heat-seeking missile. "Hat off. Now." I looked up, already prepared for this fight. I tried to speak clearly, enunciating each word. "Ma'am, I wear cochlear implants. The hat keeps them stable." She squinted at me like I was speaking alien. "What kind of music device are you hiding under there?" My stomach dropped. I could feel the heat rising to my face. Not this again. "They're not music devices. They're medical. You can see." I pulled the beanie back a little to show her the transmitter looped behind my ear. She frowned. "I don't care what you call them. No. Or I write you up." I blinked at her, stunned. "They help me hear you." She wasn't listening. He never listened. Before I could say another word, she reached for my ear. I panicked. It wasn't just instinct, it was fear. You don't touch someone's CIs. You don't rip them off like headphones. These devices are attached to a magnetized internal implant in my skull. Forcefully removing them could literally cause damage. I slapped her hand away. Firmly. Not violently, but I wasn't gentle either. Her eyes widened in shock like I had assaulted her. "How dare you?" I stood up, voice shaking but loud. "Don't ever touch me again. You don't get to decide what I can or can't use to function in this class. You have no right." You could hear a pin drop. My classmates stared at me, some with horror, some with admiration. I sat back down, breathing hard, hoping that would be the end of it. But Mrs. Kane wasn't done. She was just getting started. And so was I. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. Not people like her. Not when someone like me, a girl, a student and deaf, had the audacity to talk back. Mrs. Kane didn't say a word for the next 10 minutes. Not a scold, not a glare. She just stalked around the room like a caged animal, watching us work on our assignments. I tried to keep my head down. My CIs were still on, my beanie tugged slightly back behind my ears, my pencil scribbling aimlessly on my notebook even though I couldn't focus on a single damn thing. Then it happened. I didn't hear her coming, not clearly, but I felt a shift in the air behind me. A shadow. And then snap. The magnetic click of one side of my CI ripped off my scalp, then the other. And just like that, silence. But not the peaceful kind I grew up with. Not the silence I chose at home when I took my CIs off. This was violent. Disorienting. Disempowering. I gasped and turned around, and there she was, standing behind me, holding my cochlear implants in her hand like a prize she'd just snatched off the top shelf. I stood up so fast my chair screeched backward. My vision blurred. My fingers were trembling. I couldn't hear the classroom anymore. Couldn't hear the gasps, the shouts, the stunned silence. But I could see it, their wide eyes, their open mouths. I took a step forward and screamed, "Give them back." I couldn't even hear my own voice. Mrs. Kane clutched the sea ice against her chest and shook her head like I was the one being irrational. "I told you no electronics in class," she mouthed slowly, over-enunciating like I was an idiot. Oh, she was done now. I reached forward to grab them, but she backed away. "You're being disruptive," she barked. I couldn't hear her, but I saw the way her lips curled around the words. And I lost it. I shouted again, not for her, not for the class, for me. Because rage has a volume even when you can't hear it. I told her she had no right, that what she did was illegal, that she just assaulted a disabled student and confiscated a federally protected medical device. I told her if those devices were damaged, I'd make sure her career was over. That's when the principal walked in. I couldn't read his lips, he was talking too fast, too loud. But I knew from the way his hand hovered at his chest, trying to calm the situation, that he had no idea what just happened. I pointed to Mrs. Kane, pointed to my ears, pointed to the sea ice still clenched in her hand. I signed fast and harshly, even though I knew he didn't understand sign. My hands were spelling one thing loud and clear: she took my ease. My sea ice were finally handed back. But I was pulled out of class. Straight to the principal's office. No interpreter. No parent. Just an assistant principal trying to talk at me while I sat there, desperately clutching my reattached sea ice and praying to every god I could name that the microphones hadn't been damaged. Eventually, I was told I was being suspended. For yelling. For causing a scene. For grabbing a staff member. They didn't care what she did. But I did. And I wasn't about to forget it. Suspension. For defending myself. For protecting medical equipment. For being deaf in a classroom that treated me like I was the problem. They handed me the slip like it was a speeding ticket. Told me to cool off, think about my behavior, and return after 3 days. 3 days. I had already spent 17 years learning how to survive in a world built for people who could hear. And now they wanted me to reflect? Well, I wasn't going to reflect. I was going to retaliate. My dad picked me up, and the minute I stepped into the car, I ripped the slip in half and tossed it into the back seat. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He knew from the way I was clutching my sea ice like they were made of glass that something was seriously wrong. When I told him everything, from the beanie to the moment she ripped them off, I could see the heat rising behind his eyes. He was furious, but quiet. That kind of dangerous quiet. "I'll handle this," he said. But I shook my head. "No," I signed slowly. "We'll handle this." We went straight home. I didn't go to my room. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop, logged into the school portal, and started compiling every email I'd ever exchanged with teachers about my accommodations. I printed out copies of my 504 plan, scanned letters from my audiologist. I even found the documentation from my CI surgery, in case they wanted proof of what they were dealing with. Then I wrote out a timeline, step by step, detail by detail. I listed witnesses in the classroom, kids who had spoken up, even those who texted me after saying they were horrified. I saved screenshots. And then I drafted the letter. Started simple. To whom it may concern, I am writing to formally report a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Section 504, and state-level protections regarding the rights of students with hearing impairments. It ended with a demand for disciplinary action. Not for me, but for Mrs. Kane. And I didn't just send it to the school. I sent it to the district. To the Office for Civil Rights. To the State Board of Education. We also called our lawyer, a family friend, one of Dad's old college buddies. He took one look at the letter and said, "Do not let this go." And we didn't. 2 days into my suspension, I got a call. The district wanted to speak with me, but this time not in the principal's office. This time it was downtown. A formal hearing. With reps from the district. With my dad. With a lawyer. And most importantly, with an interpreter. The second I walked into the conference room, I could feel the shift. They weren't expecting someone like me. They thought they could bury me in bureaucracy. But I came prepared. I laid out every detail. I explained the CICE, the function, the vulnerability. I described the pain, the fear, the humiliation of having something so personal ripped off my body like it was a pair of headphones. And then I handed them the signed statements from classmates who saw it happen. The room was silent. This time I wasn't. They said they'd investigate, that they'd take it seriously. And for once I believed them. The investigation moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. Within 5 days, Mrs. Kane was placed on administrative leave. Not just from my school, from the entire district. She wasn't just a substitute anymore. She was a liability. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt powerful. But I didn't. Not yet. Not when my reputation was still stained by that suspension. Not when half the school was whispering behind my back, asking if I overreacted. Not when I had to walk through those halls again like nothing happened. But that's when the emails started. First, a forced apology from the principal. One of those, "we deeply regret the events that occurred" type things. Like he hadn't stood there in his office and sided with her without even asking for my version. Then came Mrs. Kane's email. Or rather, the one someone told her to send. It was full of empty words, misunderstanding, respect for all students, unintentional harm. What it didn't have was accountability, or regret, or anything resembling an apology to a disabled student who had her rights stripped from her in front of a classroom of silent onlookers. So I did what I do best. I made noise. I uploaded a post on social media. Nothing dramatic. No rage. Just the facts. What happened. What she did. And how the school tried to bury it. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. The captions spoke volumes. When a substitute rips medical equipment off a deaf student's head in front of 30 people, and I get suspended, that's not a misunderstanding. That's discrimination. Within hours, it was everywhere. My classmates shared it. My old teacher shared it. A local disability rights page reposted it, and suddenly I was getting DMs from other students who had dealt with similar crap from staff. One girl told me a different sub once yelled at her for using a text-to-speech app in class. Another guy said he was forced to read out loud despite having a diagnosed stutter. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. So I started something. A petition. A campaign. #access is not optional. I demanded training for substitute teachers on disability accommodations. Mandatory knowledge of 504 and IEP plans. Disciplinary protections for students defending their own assistive devices. And wouldn't you know it, the media picked it up. Just a small local article at first, but it was enough to make the district squirm. They called my dad again. This time to settle. They wiped the suspension from my record. Issued a formal apology. And, most importantly, agreed to implement new training across every school in the district. Mrs. Kane? She resigned. They said it was voluntary. We all knew it wasn't. But that wasn't enough. Because this wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting the next girl who walks into a classroom with her silence clipped behind her ears, only to have it ripped away by someone who thinks she knows better. That girl won't be alone. Not anymore. A week after Mrs. Kane's resignation, I received a thick envelope in the mail. Not an email. Not a phone call. An actual handwritten letter. At first, I thought it might be another pathetic attempt at a scripted apology. But the handwriting was shaky, uneven, like someone was nervous. I opened it cautiously. It wasn't from Mrs. Kane. It was from another teacher. Someone who had been in the building that day watching from a distance. Let's call her Ms. Rivera. She wrote, "I saw what happened. I saw her take your CICE. And I didn't speak up. I'm sorry. Not just for what you went through, but because I was a coward. I should have gone straight to the principal. I should have stood up. But I was afraid to be the difficult one, and you paid the price for my silence. Please don't stop fighting. You're changing things." I read the letter twice. Then a third time. I folded it carefully and tucked it into a journal. Not because I needed the apology, but because it was proof. Proof that people were waking up. That I wasn't just some angry girl with a hearing aid. I was visible now. And that visibility, it was power. It gave me momentum. The petition I launched, it reached over 50,000 signatures in less than 2 weeks. Local disability advocates reached out, then national ones. I was invited to speak on a virtual panel about accessibility in education. Me, a high school student, sharing space with lawyers, professors, and policymakers. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was leading. And with every interview, every post, every microphone placed in front of me, I didn't just tell my story. I told theirs. I told the stories of kids who got written up for needing extra time on tests. Of girls who were pulled out of gym class because teachers didn't know how to adapt for their mobility devices. Of boys who stopped using speech-to-text because they were mocked by classmates and ignored by staff. They gave me their words and I gave them my voice. I started holding lunchtime meetups at school, unofficial support circles for disabled and neurodiverse students who were tired of being overlooked. We didn't ask permission. We just met. And slowly we were seen. The administration started tiptoeing around us. Suddenly, posters about accessibility popped up in the hallways. Training days were announced. Students were invited to give feedback on district policies. It was too late for them to pretend they'd cared all along. We knew better. Because we were living the change, not just printing it. Me. I still walked through those halls. Still deaf. Still proud. But no longer alone. I was the girl who yelled back. The girl who said no when someone tried to silence me. And they finally understood what I had known from the beginning. You don't need to hear everything to know what's right. You just need to listen to your own voice. The emails started again, but this time not from teachers or allies. They were from the district's legal department. At first they were worded politely. We'd like to discuss the petition you've circulated. We're reviewing the recent media coverage. Please refrain from using the school's name directly in interviews. But when I didn't back down, the tone changed. Now it was, we've noticed your ongoing social media posts. You're creating a potentially disruptive environment. This could affect your academic standing. I laughed. They still didn't get it. I wasn't doing this for popularity or pity. I wasn't doing it to go viral. I was doing it because every time I walked into that school with my CI clipped behind my ear, someone still looked at me like I didn't belong. Like I was a problem to manage, not a student to protect. So I posted the emails. I blacked out names. I wasn't reckless. But I let everyone see exactly how they were trying to gaslight me into silence again. And once again, the internet had my back. Parents started calling the district. Alumni wrote letters to the school board. A local journalist reached out for an in-person interview, one that would air on the evening news. And that was when they panicked. Suddenly, the legal threats vanished. In their place, a new email, this time from the superintendent himself. We believe you have raised important issues, and we would like to invite you to sit on a new student advisory board focused on disability access and inclusion. A seat at the table. Cute. I showed the email to my dad. He was furious. They want to use you as a token. But I smiled. Because I already had a plan. I replied, I accept, under the condition that real student input is implemented, and I retain the right to speak publicly about any issue the board discusses. They agreed. So I joined. Not because I wanted to play nice, but because I wanted a front row seat, and the power to hold them accountable from inside. Every meeting I wore my CI proudly, and I brought other students with me. A girl with a visual impairment who'd been denied large print tests. A nonverbal student who'd been dismissed because his communication device wasn't convenient. A boy with ADHD who'd been kicked out of class more times than he could count. They tried to intimidate me. Instead, I built an army. And slowly policies started to change. Not because the system wanted to, but because it had to. Because we forced it to. Because one girl shouted and then others shouted louder. And the silence broke. You'd think that after all of this, after losing her position, being quietly blacklisted from subbing in our district, and watching her name become a cautionary tale, Mrs. Kane would fade into the background. But narcissists don't disappear that easily. She resurfaced. Not in the school she was done there, but through a blog. One of those anonymous teacher truth spaces where bitter ex-staff vent about how kids these days are so entitled. Someone sent me the link. It was unmistakably her voice. The post was called, "The Day a Student Faked a Disability to Get Me Fired." She didn't use my name, of course, but she described everything. The classroom, the beanie, the violent outburst, her words, the manipulative smear campaign that followed. She painted herself as the victim, a well-meaning teacher, just trying to enforce the rules. And I was the villain. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. People knew. And so did I. At first I was angry. Faking a disability? I'd been deaf since birth. My medical records, my CI equipment, years of audiologist visits. All of it was proof. But none of that mattered to her. She didn't care about truth. He cared about control. And I'd taken that from her. So I responded, not in anger but with clarity. I wrote an open letter. I didn't stoop to her level or name her directly. I didn't need to. Instead, I wrote about what it means to live with a disability in a world that constantly tries to minimize or erase it. I wrote about being silenced, dismissed, accused, about how exhausting it is to have to prove, every single day, that you're not a liar. Then I shared the post on the same platform, and added, "This is what the truth sounds like, even if you can't hear it." It went viral in 24 hours. Teachers from all over chimed in. Students, parents, advocates. It drowned her out completely. She deleted her blog 2 days later. Because when people finally saw who she really was, no one wanted to listen. And here's the best part. That open letter was picked up by a national disability rights org. They asked if I'd turn it into a keynote speech at their youth summit. Me standing on a stage in front of hundreds, maybe thousands. The same girl who once hid her CI under a beanie. And you know what I'm going to say when I stand at that podium? I'm going to say, "Mrs. Kane, if you're out there, I didn't ruin your career. You did. I just stopped pretending you deserved it." I stood backstage at the summit, hands trembling. The kind of trembling that happens not from fear, but from knowing that finally you're exactly where you're meant to be. There was a sea of faces beyond the curtain. Students in wheelchairs, teens signing to one another, service dogs curled by their humans' feet. And me, a girl who once thought her voice didn't matter. Now they'd flown me out to speak. The event organizer, a bright-eyed woman with a cane and a sharper mind than anyone I'd met in education, gave me a reassuring nod. "It's your story now," she said. And it was. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were warm. The mic adjusted to my height. And for a moment I just breathed, the sound of it humming in my CI like music. Then I began. I didn't start with the anger, or the drama, or even the injustice. I started with Benny. "Most of you probably don't know who that is," I said, smiling. "He's my dog, my very first advocate. He was the one who sat beside me the day I came home crying because my teacher snatched my Cochlear implant off my head." Laughter from the crowd, the understanding kind. And now here I am, not hiding, not silenced, but here, because one person's cruelty doesn't define your value. You do. I told the story, all of it. How I'd been shouted down, suspended, told I was disruptive, just for standing up for myself. How I turned that pain into action, into advocacy, into a movement that had students from other schools emailing me for help. I shared how we pushed the district to revamp its disability training program. How I helped develop policy language to protect assistive device users. How for the first time ever our school hired a full-time ASL interpreter. And when I spoke about Mrs. Kane, I didn't tear her down. I simply said, some people are more afraid of losing power than they are of hurting students. Those people do not belong in education. Pause. A murmur of agreement. Then I ended with this. I used to think being deaf made me less. That speaking up made me difficult. that being different made me a problem. Now I know that being different is my power. And that power, it's loud, even if you can't hear it. The applause nearly shook the room. Afterward, I was flooded, kids hugging me, parents thanking me, one little girl with purple hearing aids whispering, "You're like a superhero." I didn't feel like a superhero. I felt seen. Back home things changed too. My principal resigned. The school board implemented a student-led accessibility committee. And the best part? The district started a mentorship program, pairing younger disabled students with upperclassmen who had their backs. Guess who was the first mentor? Me. Because revenge doesn't always come in shouts or lawsuits. Sometimes it comes in silence, in showing up, and in making sure that no one else ever has to feel like they don't belong. I thought that was the end. I'd had my moment, my speech, my justice, my peace. But people like Mrs. Kane? They don't go quietly. It started as a whisper, a local blog post, then a podcast appearance, not by her but someone from her old network. She was mistreated, they claimed, overreacted to, cancelled by an overzealous student with an attitude. They didn't say my name, but they didn't have to. It was always the same playbook. Paint the disabled kid as too sensitive, too aggressive, too much. And what made me angriest? It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about every student who looked up to me now. Every girl with hearing aids. Every kid with sensory needs who was just barely brave enough to ask for help. I couldn't let her rewrite the narrative. So I called in my own army. Not of lawyers. Not of bloggers. Of students. The mentorship network we'd built had grown fast. Dozens of schools. Hundreds of kids. Stories of being denied ramps, of aides ignoring them, of bathroom passes refused. And now they had a voice. Together we launched our own platform, Loud Without Sound. We featured essays, stories, even mini documentaries about real students and their experiences with inaccessible education. We included staff too, the good ones, the teachers who listened. Me. I posted my full story, start to finish, not the dramatized, trimmed for sympathy version. The raw version. What it feels like to have your CI snatched off your head like it's a pair of earbuds. What it's like to have the system protect an adult's pride instead of a child's dignity. What it's like to scream and still not be heard. We even hosted a panel where students could talk to state-level policymakers. And when I spoke, I made sure to say, this isn't about revenge anymore. This is about remembrance. Remember us the next time you write a policy without us. Remember us when your sub-training is 10 pages of rules and 0 about accessibility. Remember what happens when we stay quiet, and why we won't anymore. That hit harder than any blog post ever could. And just like that, her little whisper campaign vanished. Because when you shine a light on the truth, it burns through everything. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Revenge isn't about making someone suffer. It's about making sure they never get the chance to hurt someone else again. And I was just getting started. Months passed. Seasons changed. I had grown used to the quiet. Not just the quiet of the world when my CI was off, but the quiet that comes after you win. The kind that feels more like space than silence. A space where you can finally breathe. Mrs. Kane was never heard from again. No apology. No reappearance. No redemption arc. She faded the way a storm does. Loud, angry, destructive, but eventually gone. And what was left? Me. And a life I never thought I'd have. Senior year ended with a standing ovation, not just for my grades but for what I'd helped build. A counselor told me I'd made that school safer for students they didn't even know how to support yet. "I'm sorry we didn't listen sooner," she said. I smiled. "Just promise you'll listen now." College came. I chose a university that didn't just accommodate disability, they empowered it. I walked onto that campus not as a statistic, not as a burden, but as a leader. I still mentored, still spoke, still pushed policies where they were needed. But I also let myself just be. Be a student, be a young woman, be a person who didn't always have to fight. Sometimes I'd take out my CI. Not out of frustration, but to remember. To sit in the pure silence, the space where it all started. And then I'd turn it back on. Let the world come rushing back in. Laughter, footsteps, my own voice. That's when I'd smile. Because that was the real revenge. Not the yelling. Not the suspension overturned. Not even the change I sparked in the school district. The real revenge was this. She tried to take my voice. And I built a whole world with it. Louder. Braver. Unapologetically mine.